As Nancy said, thank you all for being here. I'm gonna talk after Tatiana on kind of the potpourri of other things that our office is working on with regards to the environment and resilience and adaptation efforts. But first and foremost, I think, you know, the Valley and the residents here over the last year and this winter, you know, you continue to be on the front lines of climate change impacts, right? And that starts with things like the EPSS system that PG&E has rolled out and the constant power outages that are being experienced by all of you. That's the slide just down the street here that impacted your ingress and egress into the valley and your homes for the better part of 6 weeks, 8 weeks last year. The water issues that the supervisor mentioned. You're in the most beautiful part of our county and the most dynamic. And so that makes adaptation, recovery, resilience challenging. And that's part of our role in OR3 is to help you as community members in the valley through that, as well as, you know, all of our residents in the county. I'm gonna hand it off to Tatiana Brennan. I'll give you a short primer. I won't give you the whole arc of her career, but Tatiana's been with OR3 since 2021. She's the chief architect, the principal project manager for the creation and now implementation of our climate action and adaptation plan. So that document was created very quickly in 2022, adopted by the board in the end of 2022, and then the very next board meeting after that was adopted in December 13th of 2022, we came to the board with what was the first of 2 federally declared disasters in 2023. So the irony is thick with what we are trying to achieve. The importance is there, and Tatiana is working every day to implement the strategies and objectives outlined in that document, and she's here to give you an update on where we are in that.
Cool.
So OR3 is relatively new. Climate response is not necessarily new in the county. We had a climate action plan previous to this, to the one that was adopted. But David Carlson in our planning department was really the main person behind that. And he would check in with other departments, make sure that they were doing their part, but there wasn't one real central place. So thank you to the Board of Supervisors for moving that forward, and so that's why, you know, Dave and I are here really focusing our attention on the environment. So the OR3 really looks at environment from really, I think, an emergency response, and we consider climate change to be an emergency. And I think that most of you know that the primary cause for climate change are greenhouse gas emissions. So our climate adaptation plan focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and then also has an adaptation component. And I'm gonna explain a little bit more about why that's so critical. What we know about our greenhouse gas emissions in the unincorporated area, and I wanna be clear about what the unincorporated area is. So the county has several cities. It has Capitola, it has Watsonville, Scotts Valley, and then most of the area is unincorporated. So when I'm talking about the greenhouse gas emissions, it's for the majority actually of Santa Cruz. So the majority of our greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation, so 70%.
Ooh.
And that's not including public transportation, that's not including off-road vehicles, that's just cars, passenger cars. And for a lot of you folks, you know that commute out of the valley. So that's really what in our unincorporated county is our main issue. So our office came up with this climate action plan, and it's really focused, the majority of it is focused on decreasing these greenhouse gas emissions. Not just because of our high emissions, but the state has a mandate for 2030. By 2030, we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 40% of 1990 levels. We were producing in 1990, and if you just think about it, we have more people in Santa Cruz, right? We have more industry, somewhat. So what we were producing in 1990, we need to reduce by that. So we're producing more emissions, right? So if you just think of that, it's significant. Then by 2045, we need to reduce by 85%.
Wow.
15% needs to be sequestered. So really what the requirement is no emissions going into the atmosphere. 0 emissions in the atmosphere. We can produce 15% emissions, but they need to be sequestered. That means they need to either go into our urban or rural canopy, urban canopy, tree canopy, or into the ground, really into the ground. There's not much allowance for tree canopy. So that's why adaptation is really important, because that's where we get to that piece. Mitigation is changing our behavior. Adaptation is helping our environment adapt to our pollution, essentially. So that's where we are in terms of our requirements. And I want to tell you a little bit about the CAP, because it's really important that all of you be involved in this. You know, our take is that government is of, by, and for the people. And so we, you know, just like the 2 leaders that you heard from here, are here to serve. And so it's really important that we have your engagement. And really, I would love to hear about what your group is doing so that we can work together at the end of this. But one of the main things that we're working on in this area is, because of the storms, a lot of folks are wanting to cut down their trees. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because with home hardening in response to wildfire, we know that we need to have trees away from homes, right? But we also know that when we cut down trees that don't need to be cleared because of that it destroys the ecosystem and reduces that tree canopy that we need so desperately. So what the county has been doing is that we're really targeting any efforts that people are making to cut down their trees, and we'll send somebody out to assess, and we'll help people. And so that means an arborist can come out and say, yeah, it looks like this tree is gonna fall on your house, but really you can just cut down, you can just trim some limbs, and that will help the tree grow in another direction. It'll take a little while, but those limbs aren't gonna be falling on your house. So that's a really key thing, that we have a whole team that is out addressing that. So if you have any questions about that, please, you know, ask me or Dave. We can help you get in touch with the right person. And also, if anybody has any questions, if people wanna ask questions, is that okay?
Oh yeah, you get to run it, yeah.
Okay,
I
yeah,
have a question.
okay, sure, yeah.
Are you coordinating with PG&E?
Well, I think that is a Mr. Reed. I don't work with PG&E, but Mr. Reed does.
And they're cutting down
I'll
trees.
talk a little bit about
Thanks.
Okay,
Can I ask you a question?
sure,
So, Glenn Glazer, Fulton.
yeah,
I work as a software engineer. By virtue of my job, I get to work from home, which has many benefits. But one of them is that I don't drive anywhere.
nice.
So the question is, because that of course reduces emissions and so on.
Yeah,
And so the question is, what can the county do to encourage employers where appropriate? Obviously, if you work in a store, you can't do this, but to encourage people and maybe subsidize people for working at home to reduce gas emission by not commuting to work.
I'm so glad you asked that. Because I wanna talk about, you know, what the scope is of what we can do, and why I said it's so important for us to work together. So we have jurisdiction over the unincorporated area. There are limits there. So what that means in terms of jurisdiction is that we have jurisdiction over the things that we touch. So what we touch are building permits. So we can encourage people to build using electrification. We can build charging stations in the unincorporated areas. We can promote the use of public transportation. We have a rail trail project that you probably have been driving on SoCal and seen the construction. So that's part of our efforts to increase what we call multimodal, so public transportation. What we can't do is require people to buy electric cars. But what we can do is we can work with 3CE, which is the Central Coast Community Energy, to provide rebates to people, which is something that our office is working closely with 3C&E on that project and on others. So I'm saying this not as a, this isn't our problem, it's just that as we are working more and more on this issue that is new for all of us. I mean, some of us have been working in the environmental world for a while, but it's new in the sense that local government is really taking this on in a way that is new, in the sense of building electrification, electric vehicles. I mean, most of us did not grow up with electric vehicles. That was not something new, and certainly not an electrified home. So these are new things that we're adapting to. We're adapting to how do we promote it in government? What kind of requirements can we have? There was just a recent ruling in response to Berkeley requiring that businesses be all electrified that was struck down. So all of us in government are paying attention to that, right? So we're tracking these things. So we are doing everything within our power to work on the environment and promote policies. But that's where we need to work with the public and any kind of organization that can encourage the public, provide information about rebates, provide information about, because it's scary if you get an electric car, you don't know where can I charge it. Provide that kind of information. So what we want to do is work hard in our domain and connect, bump up and connect, and like tree roots, integrate with the efforts of the community. Really long-winded answer. Does that?
Sort of.
Sort of.
There are two other places I think you can help with, in my
Please.
opinion,
Yeah.
and that's reliable power and reliable internet.
Yes.
Because in order to work
Yes.
from home, which was really the basis of my question,
Yes.
then you need those things, or if I'm out of either one of those, then I can't work, right? So
Yes.
whatever the county can do to ride AT&T, which is a whole other discussion, or
Yes.
ride
Yes.
PG&E, which is also a four-letter word,
Right.
whatever that you could do to make the environment more consistent as well as environmentally friendly, then more people can work from home and take cars off the road and blah, blah, blah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think Mr. Reed is going to be talking a little bit about that piece. Yes.
Electrification's great when the electricity works.
Right.
And up here, if I
Yeah.
didn't have my gas-fired fireplace and my gas stove,
Yeah.
I'd be out of luck.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I'm not burning
Right.
wood,
Right.
but
Right.
I don't know that we could go electrical up here.
Absolutely.
The propane, the generators.
Generators, yeah.
They're either using gas
They're awful.
and polluting and
Absolutely.
are horrible, or they're using propane, which is what we did, which isn't quite so bad,
And
but
if it's an extended outage, the gas stations run out, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
It doesn't make
Propane
sense in
again.
northern SLV.
Right. Right. No, and that's the conundrum, right? Is the best practices are not necessarily ones that are easily applicable here, right? Because of the connectivity issues, because of the electrical grid, right?
Well, somebody mentioned, or maybe you did mention, having storage capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So, during a storm, if there was adequate storage capacity, and so how could the county actually incentivize that or somehow, promote that as a way to deal with this issue?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just gonna not respond to your because
Okay,
she had her hand
fine.
up.
That's
I
what
butted
we
in
think
anyway.
all the time, that's a great, we're like, where do you store it? So outside of the obvious environmental impacts of not reaching those goals, I'm the 85% one just stuck in my head. It's tremendous.
Yes.
So outside of the positive environmental goals of that, what are the consequences from the state, if I understand this correctly, if this county doesn't reach that goal?
Right.
What does that mean? What does that look like?
So the state has been a benevolent parent in some respect. And they haven't said clearly to counties, this is gonna be the consequence.
Okay.
But in meetings and in the climate world, what has been made clear to us is that if the counties can't do their own work, that then the state
Will.
will have to do it for
Yeah,
us.
and I keep thinking back to what you said as far as storage capacity, like,
Mhm.
if everybody could afford to put solar panels up and to
Oh,
have
right.
batteries, I mean, we're looking at that right now, and it's just so
Oh, absolutely.
expensive, and it's like, how are we gonna do this to acquire this
Absolutely.
much,
Yeah.
you know?
And they don't work when the grid is down,
Oh,
And
absolutely.
not
which
everybody
is another
can
problem.
put
And the
solar on their house
CPUC doesn't
either.
have.
Yeah.
And I just wanna be clear that the three of us
Yes.
here,
Oh.
that we know this. We know what you're talking about. And so we're not here to paint a picture that everything is great. It's not. And what we have now for the first time is we have an office that is dedicated to this. So departments in the county are working hard in their domain. So we have community development and infrastructure, they're working on roads, they're working on unincorporated infrastructure, right? They're working on permits, and that of course is a whole other conversation. We have human services that is working on social welfare programs, we have health, right? So each one is working on these different sectors of the public, right? We don't have a sector like that. We don't have just health. We don't have just social welfare. And so really what our office is in a lot of respects is problem solving. And so that's what we do for most of our time is we look at these problems and we work within the county and we work without the county to try to figure out how can we solve these problems. And that's what the Board of Supervisors was looking for, is for an office that could respond to emergencies, but could also figure out how to find solutions. And so when you were hearing about, Dave's background, there was a reason that somebody was picked that had this kind of experience in the county. For myself, I did not work in a supervisor's office, but my background is in community programs, is in collective impact, and so I also come with that same kind of experience. Saying this, that we know what you're talking about. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about my strategy, and I wanted to hand it over to Dave, because Dave is working a little bit more external with our external partners. But what we're doing internally is we have pulled together a climate work group, and so that's folks from across departments that are like a little think tank. And so what they do is anything that a department is working in, it's on CDI, our health services, our general services department, if something comes to them, standard work, they apply a climate lens to it. So like with the tree stuff. Before it would have been, sure, let's get rid of trees, it's gonna be a problem, but now we don't do that. We stop, we take some extra steps, right? So in every single area, we're doing that. And so we're building out this infrastructure within this work infrastructure within the departments. And we're gonna be presenting on April 30th to our Board of Supervisors, and we strongly encourage you to attend that meeting where we will be introducing this framework. And so it's not just gonna be this work group, we have a phased plan. And so what our plan is to get really solid within the department, be really clear about what our goals are, what our strategies are, have a response, and then Dave is working on our external partner relationships to make sure that we have strong relationships with PG&E, with others, with 3CNE, so that we can rely on these external partners for support with our infrastructure, and then hopefully funding support. Taxes aren't gonna do it all for us right now. I wanna turn it over to Dave, but before I do, yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, I have a question about the 40%, let's use 40% for the scary 80.
She's still.
Well, as an example, so one thing I'm really interested in considering how vastly different electrification can be in cities and can't be, where I live in Boulder Creek, is it a number that has to be reached by the county as a whole?
That is a good question. It is
Because if it is as a
unincorporated.
whole, then it seems to me if you electrify like mad in the city, maybe that can help offset us guys where we're at.
And that is what we're considering, right? Because the unincorporated area is huge, right? And so you have, areas up in the mountains that are hard to reach, that don't have cell phone service,
Yeah, like me, yeah.
right? And then you've got Live Oak, which is in a lot of respects pretty urban comparatively. So that's where we're focusing our energy, right, is in the places where we can easily make these changes, and then we're seeing it as a phased process. And I think Dave is working on our final phases. I'm working on more of the immediate, what can we do in our areas that are easiest to reach, so that our departments can make changes. And Dave is looking at our harder to reach areas.
You're looking at agriculture too?
Yeah, ask real quickly,
Yeah.
what sort of elements do you have, in terms of sequestration potential? So you mentioned agriculture, that's a pretty big one.
Yeah.
What is the percentage of, the, automobiles compared to, fallow fields? Because they give off more than what the, automobiles do.
Yeah.
What's the percentage?
I don't know what the percentage is, maybe Dave, you can speak to that. What we are doing is, we have a, agricultural commissioner that's part of the county, so we're working with them, and they're our connection to landowners, to, agricultural, business owners, and so that's our angle. I will admit that right now, because the biggest shift is going to be decreasing emissions, we're focusing on that. We're doing it both concurrently, but really the efforts are on building electrification of vehicles, charging stations, grid improvement, because we know that, you know, the entire, it's really not an issue just for the wildland urban interface. It really is, with more electrification, that's
I was the recipient of the, air quality, getting back, the gas mowers and blowers and that kind of
great.
stuff. That's
Uh-huh.
80%, but I seen it only in the paper, like the Good Times and the banner. But I did not see it in the stores, any advertisement or anything. And that's huge, 80% I got back. I mean, that they paid for.
Yeah, can you give me your information
One blower
afterwards?
gives off more
Or-
emissions than a car.
Than-
Oh, I know,
than
that's
cars.
terrible.
So
It's hard on
terrible.
people with asthma, just to
Yeah.
across the
Oh,
Not to
street.
mention noise.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
animals
so,
and
I mean,
Yeah.
it was addressed, but not, there's no advertisement other than the banner that I see.
Right,
I mean, that's easily,
And while I understand the emphasis on, you know, something you have more effect over,
yeah,
the sequestration potential in this county is massive,
oh, I agree,
absolutely massive.
I agree.
Forest management and agricultural soils and various things like that could sequester so much carbon, it's mind-boggling.
Absolutely,
If
absolutely.
the management techniques were just shifted.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, all right.
Dave's turn.
You wanna take it away?
So yeah, I can talk a little bit about a few things, and I
Thank
wanna
you,
make sure
Tatiana.
that we leave as much time for more questions. I will just touch quickly on carbon sequestration. So one of the things that we're trying to understand is the use of pyrolysis and gasification and carbonation machines, carbonators, not the bubbles that go into water, but a burning technique that produces what's called biochar. So we know that biochar is basically concentrated carbon. We know that the Surface Mine Geology State Regulatory Authority that regulates surface mines has said, you know, old surface mines are great places to begin to sequester carbon in our state. You know, most everybody in this room knows the rich mining history we have in our county,
Yeah.
and the numbers of mines and open quarries for sand and gravel and limestone and all of those things. So we do have a lot of potential to both process the woody and organic biomass that comes out of our mountains, and needs to be done from a hazardous fuel reduction standpoint. The hurdle that we need to get over right now is actually with MBARD. It is which is the Monterey Bay Air Resources Control District, or regulatory.
Resource control district.
Yeah, so right now, they have some very strict state, federal laws around how you can use those resources, those tools, those carbonators and pyrolysis machines. and we need to work with them to figure out whether we create a countywide permit, and then we can operate them, and my goal is in a decentralized manner, so that we could bring that technology. Actually, we talked at one point about bringing it down to the field across from Safeway and processing a lot of the material that fell down during last March's windstorms, the bomb cyclone that blew everything down. But we're struggling with that permit piece, but I think that's still, we have eyes on that as one of our primary sequestration strategies. And then obviously working with our agricultural industry. Right now there's a big push to tilling in that biochar for a soil amendment standpoint. We think that there's a market there for some of that. So the idea is, can we create the markets for it, the production of the material, to then pay for the implementation of it, permit side of it. So that's a little weedy, but it's definitely something that we're looking at. So a couple other things I wanted to bring up and then just continue open questions is around hazardous fuel reduction, wildfire fuel reduction. So as we transition here in the next, 18 days to our spring equinox and then into our next season, which is fire season, our winter hazard, storm hazard season and fire season. It's a 2-season county. In our lens and in the lens of work that we do, there are a couple big things that are out there from a fuel reduction standpoint that are coming. One of them is here now, and I want to let everybody know about it. And that's I'm going to use the acronym and then I'll spell it out. So it's the CDBG-DR, Owner Occupied Mitigation Program. So the Community Development Block Grant is a federal program. Disaster recovery, they come in, it's an arm of HUD at the federal level. It's managed through HCD, Housing and Community Development, at the state level, and they bring dollars in, unfortunately, about 3 years after a federal disaster to help communities. This is CZU disaster designated funds that are available and being used for owner-occupied rebuild. So it's up to $500,000 for CZU families that are income qualified to help them rebuild. I would have liked to have seen that money 18 months ago. I don't have any control over the timing of that. But the interesting and exciting opportunity for all of our county residents, not just CZU, burn scar impacted residents, is owner occupied mitigation dollars. So you can, if you're a low medium income, low moderate income qualified resident, you can get up to $50,000.
Oh, Recover California.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can get up to $50,000 to do hazardous fuel reduction work on your property, home hardening work on your property. So this is the first time, one of the first times that the CDBG-DR mitigation dollars have come in post-fire. So I can't promise you this is a state and federal run program. It's not run by us. So I'm hoping it's effective and efficient. Up to $50,000. So I think what we want to do is encourage folks to visit our website, or I'll list the URL, and maybe I'll get it to Nancy and we can distribute it out through the Valley Women's Club mailing and network. The Santa Cruz County Long-Term Recovery Group, sccltrg.org, sccltrg.org. It has a YouTube page. We just had a community meeting last week outlining the process to access these funds. We really want to encourage everybody, right? You can be urban, rural, you can be North County, South County, any county resident is eligible, provided you meet the income qualification issues. And there's a whole host of questions in the application around FEMA, and did you take FEMA money, and duplication of benefits. Just keep in mind it's CZU related. So if you weren't impacted by CZU, you would say, no, I didn't get any FEMA individual assistance because I wasn't burned. But all this money's out there. So an unlimited pot, we are, quote, competing at a competitive grant level with 9 other counties that were impacted during 2020's fire season. But I want our community to get as many of those dollars as possible. So happy to answer more questions there. A couple other things that are happening on the hazardous fuel side. One is we did cross the first hurdle of a BRIC grant, which is Building Resilient Infrastructure and Community. That's another FEMA federal dollar grant. That is probably still 18 months out, but that will bring additional additional federal dollars to do home hardening and defensible space to some pockets of the of the kind of Boulder Creek area, Bonnie Doon, and 4 other rural communities. So, we're trying, as Tatiana said, as Bruce said, we're trying to bring federal dollars in when we can, because we can't fund all this stuff ourselves as a local government. So I'll keep, that one's kind of just wanting to put that out there, that's coming, but the owner-occupied mitigation dollars are here now, forever, so we want people to apply.
And that money is more reliable than FEMA?
The OOM, the owner-occupied mitigation, or the BRIC? Or both.
Either or both, yeah, because FEMA
So-
right now is us $70 million or something.
Yes, so what you're talking about from a FEMA standpoint is the public assistance FEMA problem. That's a big problem, and a whole other conversation. FEMA generally, from an individual assistance standpoint, for you as residents who were impacted last year, is no less convoluted and complicated. Your available dollars for individual assistance is up to about $84,000 in 2 different buckets. So if you had damage to your home from a fallen tree in last year's March disaster, or other damages to your home or structure, you could get up to $41,000 or $42,000 for free money. And then you could go to the SBA, Small Business Administration, to get loans. Because if you can get over their application process, relatively available to folks. This owner-occupied mitigation is another pot of money that you would apply to make sure you're eligible. You'd say, I want to do defensible space work. They'll coordinate a contractor coming out, estimating what that cost is. They'll secure the contractor, they'll do the work. So in theory, because I haven't seen it on the ground yet, it's not something that you have to burden yourself with on the implementation side. You have to do the application process, and then they coordinate with a construction company or a construction management company.
So since CZU, the fire stopped right at my driveway on 236. Everything north of me was destroyed, including fallen leaf, and I'm right at a point where it basically stopped, which is weird, but whatever. So I spent $15,000 in the last 3.5 years on tree work. So this is like, so I'm out of luck, right? Because I already did it when it needed to get done.
Yeah, but
There's no
retroactive element to it, no. But what I can say is,
I don't need to do more.
well, and you may not need to.
people for having
I
more.
don't.
Right, one of the
That's
things.
why it stopped there, 'cause people thought, there's trenches and everything that got dug, people,
Sure. Yeah, and so one of the things that I think is important that organizations like the Santa Cruz County Fire Safe Council and our FireWise community organizations are doing is educating community members and reminding them that actually the most important area from a wildfire defense space standpoint is your zone, is what's called zone 0, right? So it's the material of the siding of your home out 10 feet, right? So there may be folks like yourself who have done all of the hazardous fuel reduction work, but unless you have, WUI compliant siding, or if you have vegetation within the first 10 feet, those are also eligible activities in this owner occupied mitigation funding. So you could apply to do a wainscoting, the first 3 feet of your home, and make that corrugated metal or something that is wildfire resistant. You could apply for funding to do some vegetation work or some landscaping work to create that zone 0 buffer around your house, because those are critical pieces.
it's scorched earth. I read someplace about the home hardening, siding thing.
Yeah,
So
Yeah,
that's
so-
it, okay.
so that, go ahead.
I was gonna ask you, I'll let you finish, I was gonna ask you questions, not related to this.
Okay, a couple other things I wanted to touch on because we brought them up. So grid reliability, or lack of reliability. So we were scheduled last month It needed to get pushed because of kind of all of the impacts that we had, late January, early February, the February 5th windstorm knocking 30,000 customers out of power for up to 5 days. PG&E does want to start to have conversations about microgrid development in the valley, which is a huge step forward. So to this question of storage and where do we put stuff, we county government is working with 3CE on locations for what they, large battery storage. More so in the urban environment, but I think from a microgrid standpoint, clearly if PG&E is recognizing what we have been beating into their heads is that your EPSS system is not a sustainable system for community, right? It may be sustainable for reducing wildfire strikes, and we need that, but you can't just at the expense of eliminating that risk create a power outage a day on average. In 2022 it was on average in the valley, it was a power outage a day. In 2023 it went down to like 0.7 outages a day on average between like April and October. So incrementally getting better, but they're also rolling out EPSS into more parts of the county. So I was dealing with constituents and board of supervisors in La Selva Beach. Being like, well, why is my power out in La Selva Beach? I'm socked in fog. And it's like, well, because a bird, a chicken, a twig, whatever fell on the line and triggered the EPSS. So they're rolling it out everywhere, as they should, to reduce the risk, but we have to hold them to be accountable to reliability as well.
Well, they're using an antiquated system to do it, and they could have a modern system in there like Southern California Edison, and they would actually know where the power outage is automatically, and they could go treat it right away instead of driving up down the road trying to find it, and find the dead squirrel on the ground, or the burning squirrel on the ground.
Put them out.
So that was the short answer to, we are engaging with PG&E and where we need to get our elected supervisors or our board chair to write a letter to the CPUC or to our state legislators to hold them to be accountable. We will do that, and that is the relationship we have on the other side of on that AT&T side, right? Kohler, the carrier of last resort, the board just heard a presentation from AT&T last week, and what we as local government are trying to do is work with our state legislators and the CPUC and our federal legislators to hold these large corporations accountable to what you need. The last thing I'll bring up, because you mentioned it in an email to the supervisor's office, is recovery and rebuild process. And so I'm happy to answer questions around kind of CZU rebuild, disaster rebuild broadly. I will say that the board and CDI are working together to try and make sure that we take care of those impacted by CZU, that are still trying to rebuild, as well as how do we build resilience into our permitting process for future disasters. So the Recovery Permit Center will likely be integrated back into CDI in the next year or so. That doesn't mean that process and the care of folks that are still trying to rebuild won't still be there. It just will mean that we, from a financial standpoint, can't continue to pay an outside consultant to do that work. We need our own staff to do that work. So that's in process, and I'm happy to dive into whatever level of weeds around the challenges of rebuilding are here. This constituency here, that the tenure you have in this valley, understand from disasters like Love Creek to other impacts like the one right on the road here. Our mountains move. FEMA doesn't designate Santa Cruz County, the second smallest county in the state, as the most landslide prone county in the state and the 13th in the country for any arbitrary reason, right? There's hard data that shows that we are the most landslide prone county in the state and top 20 in the country. We understand that because we live in it here, but that translates to a complex building environment to rebuild, right? When you take your home, that some of you, may have been a summer home from the 1930s or 40s, became your permanent home, and it's sitting perched on ground, and it hasn't moved, right? It's been stable, but that doesn't mean that the surrounding geology, the surrounding environment is not still hazardous, and unfortunately, county government and state government have to make sure that that home is standing for the next disaster and the next resident that lives there. And so that is unfortunately really challenging financially. And it's one of the things that I will be telling our state legislators on Monday. So I go up to Sacramento on Monday to speak at the Emergency Services Committee. And one of the things I'm gonna share with them is that the state needs an individual assistance program. And we need support in some of the challenging places of rebuilding where costs are very high. Costs are very high partially because of labor costs, but also because of the technical nature in which we live and where our homes have been damaged.
So with regard to all these buckets of money you were talking about earlier, due to the rural nature of District 5, a lot of people live off-road, on roads that are not county maintained, right? After CZU, and I happen to live on such a road, after CZU, FEMA basically said, screw you, we only do homes. Our road was severely damaged, ironically due to CAL FIRE heavy equipment, but that's fine, I value the job they do. But anyway, the road, we had to pay a lot to fix our road. And so the question is, are there any buckets of money that can be used to improve infrastructure, general, community infrastructure that's been damaged, rather than specific homes? If you follow me?
Yeah, so there's a couple things on that note. So Tatiana and another member of our staff, Annie Puckett, worked really hard after the January, February, March federal disasters last year, working with FEMA individual assistance to unlock, I think, a new way for FEMA to look at damaged road infrastructure that's not county maintained. So, knock on wood, the next disaster, your home may not be impacted, your access road may be impacted.
Right.
We worked with FEMA and figured out a protocol and a process.
We got the net.
Thanks.
Right at the end.
We worked through a process with them where all the residents on that road, that use that road for access, were able to apply individually, but kind of as a group, for a portion of the cost to fix the road.
Right.
We had a couple success stories of communities being able to do that. FEMA, they had not done that before. It took some hand-holding by Tatiana and Annie with our FEMA representatives. It took hand-holding with community members to make sure we had one estimate, $50,000, $100,000, and everybody asks for $10,000. And then FEMA could look at it in total and be like, oh, okay, they're doing it. So that was successful. The other things and the other tools that we have shared, at least at the government level with community members, are things like county service areas. So that can be another four-letter word for some folks, but it is another tool that is available to community members that live on long, extended private roads with multiple residents. And what it does is it allows you to get a simple majority of your neighbors to make sure that everybody contributes, right? So our informal road associations and our handshake deals with our neighbors dissolve sometimes over time or over stress or over the magnitude of a cost. And you can have that assessment on your tax bill so people can't get out of it, and you only need a simple majority to do that. The value of creating a CSA is you decide how much you're assessed and how you use it. You can choose to use the collected money within the government system, so if you spend that money that's collected, you have to do it through kind of a public procurement process, so it's generally a little bit more expensive. But you can also choose to do other things outside the government process because you've got yourself organized. Also that CSA becomes eligible for FEMA reimbursement dollars. So now you form a CSA for your road. The next federally declared disaster that hits us, hopefully it's not this year,
Or,
your road sustains $100,000 in damages,
Easy.
right? 75% of those damages would then be eligible to be paid for by the federal government. And the balance, the other balance, 25% would come to you. So there's an insurance policy, so to speak, by considering a CSA route. It's not perfect. I won't stand up here, the supervisor knows this and lives this with other CSA communities in the valley. It's not perfect, but it is another tool.
Yeah, what do we have, 3 dozen CSAs or something like that, and 40 maybe
Yeah.
in the county?
And so there are other nuances to it, and I don't want to go too deep into the weeds, but those are 2 ways in which we've tried to help
Great.
on the infrastructure, the private property infrastructure
That's really
side.
good to hear.
One, a slow-moving environmental disaster that's storm-related and resiliency-related is the increasing number of outdated septic systems that fail every year. I've heard numbers like 12% fail, the ones as much as reported. So, the costs are pretty high to get an engineered system up to $100,000. And it's great if we could all afford that because we'd all be much better off, but costs are prohibitive. I was just wondering if your department is working on any kind of solution to that kind of problem that's getting larger and larger every year.
Yeah, I feel like you read my notes and prompted me on this. So we have some residents who've been here since 1974 and were a part of the early 80s conversations around sewering the valley, right? And at the time, the concept of sewering the valley brought forth, and you could probably first person articulate this better than I, brought forth the concern of expanded development in the valley. What I want to try and dispel is we have a new conversation around sewering part of the valley. Right now, we received a $2 million earmark grant from Anna Eshu before she departed our county and now represents the other side and now is retiring or has retired. To explore sewering the 236 corridor from the golf course down and sewering downtown Boulder Creek and some of the residents that surround downtown Boulder Creek. So that $2 million is going to go towards exploring the feasibility of that. To me, that's the first step, right? We need to be able to have the conversation with that targeted small community and try and get to a yes with them. Because local government can't pay to sewer the valley. We can't pay to do a pilot or an initial sewering of about 1,300 connections in that area that I just described. So that cost will be borne by community members, but what it will afford them to do is have both the environmental benefit of eliminating failing septic systems. It will create a resilient sewer system subject to another disaster. They're not facing the astronomical rebuild costs and dealing with their sewer system. And there's the downtown Boulder Creek area could be revitalized from an economic development standpoint, which is now the gateway to Big Basin State Park, right? So everybody's tracking. There was a meeting last month around Big Basin's redesign, and downtown Boulder Creek really is now going to become the gateway to the park. And so those businesses are all on haul-away systems right now. So you, as we all know, you can't go, there's no public toilets. You're probably charged $5 if you've got to go, and use a toilet at one of the restaurants. And so it prohibits redevelopment of the brewery that burned down 7 years ago, and other businesses from thriving there. That could get to things like, hey, I want to go out to a nice meal, and I don't want to go to Skopazi again, but like, we can reduce vehicle miles traveled by revitalizing the downtown Boulder Creek area by sewering that and relieving them of that cost burden of having to haul away.
I'm mostly concerned about residential,
Right.
the thousands of residential
Right. And
properties.
So one of the selling points to the question, right, is that if we can be successful in this first pilot, you know, if we couldn't get any state or federal dollars, it's order of magnitude $50,000 to $60,000 per connection to try and sewer. Sounds like a lot of money. As you said, and we have a coworker who's navigating this, it's close to $100,000 for an advanced treatment septic system. And when you need an advanced treatment septic system, you have to pay that $100,000 up front, right away. If we sewer and if we get the community to say yes to the concept of sewering, that cost to become a sewered home is amortized over 20 or 30 years, right? So it's still a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but it gives people an opportunity to move in a more resilient direction away from septic systems. And candidly, right, our development patterns from the 30s and 40s created homes on lots that can't accommodate septic.
Well,
right?
combustion systems are $4,000. Combustion toilets are $4,000, and they don't allow human waste to leave the property. It seems like a lot more cost-effective solution.
Yes, composting toilets. I used to have one of the many badges I wanted to try and achieve in my professional life was like figuring out the composting toilets piece.
And combustion toilets too.
Composting toilets can be incinerating toilet systems, or you know, composting. Right now, the regulatory authority for all of that is state driven.
Right.
So we don't have any control over that. Right. We did a small haul away pilot program, and that was kind of like a diaper service, but for adults. Not the most beneficial, but one of the things, if we can get the bandwidth as an office and as a local government, is really trying to go after that kind of concept of composting, incinerate, other waste processing, you know, technologies. I think everybody thinks of composting toilets as the 1970s version of a composting toilet, and there's a lot more.
And the EPA recommends them too, so it's not like the state doesn't understand the value, you know.
And I think the biggest thing that they've told me when I've had conversations and pushed them on this, right, is, well, what do you do when you leave? And the next owner is like, well, I don't want a human waste burning machine in my
Then they don't buy that house.
Well, or it's
Part
to
of the
me,
sale.
it's the same thing as like, I bought this house and I don't like the way the kitchen is configured. So I'm gonna remodel the kitchen. So we just have to have a real estate disclosure process where it's like, you're buying the house, the composting toilet or the incinerate. If you don't want it, this is the alternative, $100,000 septic system.
Right.
Or a sewer system,
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
Well, I'm familiar with the anti-issue thing. Okay, I live right there, anti-issue money that you were talking
Yes.
about, I live right there, I was part of that sort of, but I'm not a rebuilder. And meanwhile, I'm a senior citizen on a fixed income, and I do mean fixed, very, very fixed. It's a big, huge shock. That's where we're at. Okay, so what happens if suddenly, and it's not likely to in at least 10 years, but what happens if suddenly my septic system fails? I don't have it. I don't have the money, period. Do I become homeless? What happens? There's gotta be systems for people. There's a lot of people on fixed incomes in northern San Lorenzo Valley.
Are there any grants? Or
There's gotta
any
be something
low-cost
somewhere.
loans? I mean, a long time ago, the county had low-cost loans for rebuilding septic systems.
Yeah.
But back then, they
Whatever
were
happened to that?
Yeah,
a lot cheaper.
well, and
I happen to know somebody up there who just did an illegal redig. Okay, they moved the field because there's no way in hell they could have afforded it. And they're older than me and they're on a fixed income. And that's why. People are gonna do that.
Well, and that's the.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we're both near the creek. You know,
Yeah,
I mean, you
it's-
can't just saddle people with this gigantic, insane,
Plus
buy
we
another
invest
house
too.
amount of money plus X hundred a month for the rest of your life, when nobody was expecting this stuff. And I get that it's from the state, but somebody somewhere has to do something about it, or you're gonna have suddenly a lot of homeless people, right? I mean, what else are we gonna do?
Yeah, no,
I'm not trying to lay this all on you personally, but I'm saying this is a big deal, and I don't see anybody doing anything about it anymore.
I would push back that I think we are trying to figure out ways to work on this, right? But the one thing, right, and this is truth talking, right, is that there are lots of people who have various needs throughout our county, right? And have different levels of resource, and you're on a fixed income, and you definitely don't wanna see your septic system fail, right? But you also live in a highly vulnerable, highly complex area. So we don't control the regulatory framework at the state level. We can continue to look for funding, to see, or we can pressure our state legislators to create septic rehabilitation grant programs. It's certainly something we can look
Yeah,
at.
this is not rebuild associated, which is what I'm trying to point out. There's a whole lot of us that don't fall into any of
No,
these
I
categories.
understand that, and the other piece too is that as we get closer to having these conversations with the Boulder Creek community, we need to recognize stories like yours, right? There are folks that might be eligible for a sewering project that aren't rebuilding, but are likely sitting on a ticking time bomb of their septic system.
Both me and my neighbor, who of course is anonymous, are in between town and the golf course. And we're on 236.
Okay.
So theoretically, we might be,
Right, and so the
But-
acute
but
answer.
she doesn't have 70 grand, and neither do I, and by the time that happens, it's gonna be 100 anyway. You know?
Well, and so the acute issue right now is that if for rebuilders and anybody along that proposed corridor, the idea is like if your septic system failed tomorrow, we would figure out an interim stopgap solution.
Yeah.
And then, the idea is that if the community is moving towards the direction of sewering, we're not gonna require you to spend $100,000 and then on top of
I
that.
get that, but that's at least a couple years down the road. I'm talking about what do we do between now and then?
Yeah, it's a deeper
And
conversation.
that's only a study anyway, that's not so I guess what I'm saying is there need to be other channels, other paths going on in parallel to the NISU thing.
Sure, yeah.
Is there currently in process some kind of, the home loan sounded very interesting to me, and I didn't know whether that's going on now, where if they're in that situation, the property values have increased significantly throughout the valley. There is usually equity there that can guarantee.
We're both on reverse mortgages.
Let me finish, please.
Sure, but irrelevant.
There's equity in most of these properties, for those of us who've been around a long time, that could afford even, say, a neg am mortgage, so it doesn't impact your cash flow. It does impact your equity, but that's the property you've chosen. Here we are. Is there such a program or process that's being looked at or considered presently?
Not presently with county government being the loan entity to you. So we've talked a little bit at the county level around community banks and public banking as a tool that could help in these types of situations where jurisdiction, public sector creates a bank that can loan or do some of that stuff. But county government loaning, creating a loan structure to a private citizen, to my knowledge, is not something we're working on right now. And unfortunately, if you haven't been tracking, we're gonna issue up to about $85 million in debt, which is gonna leverage us to about as much debt as we can issue in just the recovery efforts from the disaster since 2017 through 2023. So the county is not, unfortunately, right now, given the state of climate change, given the importance of this larger conversation, the county is not in a financial position to be the loan entity. But we can look at, our state and federal partners, or certainly I'm hearing, this piece is a concern, right? We haven't looked at things like a lien on your tax roll to pay for it. And generally speaking, one of the struggles with that, right, is that we do issue debt, right? We issue bonds, we do this debt development process. As we've looked into and started to look into the sewering program in Big Basin, we look at what is a volume of debt that you can issue, and you need to aggregate and have a certain threshold of money that you're trying to issue debt for. And so So one of the things that's challenging, right, is that one person or a checkerboard of folks that have this issue, getting them organized in such a way that government could issue is complicated. And we just, right now, candidly, we're dealing with the things that we can control, and private property owners have to take care of themselves to some degree, or we have to look at other state and federal options out there. If your home is impacted by a federally declared disaster, and you can document that your septic system was impacted, that would be eligible for SBA loans, which is the cheapest money you can get out there, around 2.25%. So that could be an option if your home is impacted during a disaster.
The AT&T issues, the service issues, are those mitigated at all by, and this may sound wild, Starlink efforts, or some way to bring, because our difficulty here is the remote area, and I'm thinking the satellite services that are becoming available may obviate the need to ask AT&T to deal with a local line POTS to those particular homes, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think, AT&T's argument, right, is that POTS lines, plain old telephone lines, is the dying technology. And their argument is, there's other stuff out there, right? You know, the blue area, if everybody knows the map that we're talking about, the blue and the purple area, you have one or two other options. We know, even today, that those other options are not reliable.
Right.
And not reliable enough, especially during disaster, to meet the community's needs. So the challenge with any of this stuff on some level, satellite, fiber, right, is building power backup redundancy so that in those power outage situations we can still communicate with you, like POTS is better at doing. But I think the solution, the long-term solution, is they're gonna get rid of landlines at some point, right? That's quasi inevitable. The thing that we have to do, and I say all of us because on some level it's advocating for our state and federal elected officials who are deeply engaged. Don't get me wrong, they're all still deeply engaged right in this moment. But we need to continue to make sure that alternatives become more and more reliable. The 72-hour backup that the CPUC requires telecom companies to do is a farce. The language written into the CPUC directive has no teeth. So in concept, the telecom community can say, we have a 72-hour backup mandate by the CPUC. Language, I think he might have given it to me or something.
It's terrible.
And it's got holes in it, right? It doesn't hold water. Oh yeah, I'm happy to
Okay, we are down to less than 5 minutes, so first, Dave, is there anything else you wanted to let us know
I touched
about?
on most of the points.
Okay, so if that's good, then we'll finish up the questions in just a couple minutes, and everybody, gets to applaud and thank these people for coming in. What a lot of information we got, and we will definitely guarantee to be working together. And if you want to be involved in that, you let me or Allison or Kristen or one of the other people here know.
I just want to make a quick comment on the AT&T thing, because there's two really important and irritating points to this. One of which is AT&T claims that nobody uses their systems anymore, but AT&T let their systems degrade to the point where nobody uses them. So rewarding them by letting them pull out for years of negligence is really not a happy thing for me, right? Okay. The other thing is that, as you mentioned with the 70, one of the huge differences between POTS and every other networking system is that power runs through POTS, right? The AT&T, when they laid the copper for it, they ran the power along with it, right? So in a power outage, right, it still works, right? This is not true of Comcast or Xfinity or whatever they call themselves, or Verizon or anything else, right? We have a Comcast box and a pole. After a while, power goes out, network goes out. So it's fundamentally different as technologies, and it's really important to understand that from a resiliency perspective and a uptime perspective.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think when you look at the whole distribution of where they want to be relieved of their caller of last resort. You know, not
It's
unlike the
everywhere.
FEMA landslide thing, we are the most vulnerable. We have the worst reliability in the PG&E service area. Like, you know, how often the power goes out during the EPSS season is worse here than almost anywhere else in the state by the data that I'm looking at. And that translates to the telecom community, and so it's those two are unfortunately intimately linked, right? Telecom and power, and whatever the solution is long term has to have actual realistic backup power and a servicing plan, so that when you guys are out for 6 days, not 72 hours or less, we know that they're gonna get out there and either replace the battery that's charging that thing, or the gas up the generator, or whatever. So it's not unlike the sewer situation. It's an intractable, frustrating mess of state and private industry that we just need to continue to work on.
Gotta take it over.
And I will say, to leave on a high, you know, our boss, Carlos Palacios, the CAO, says, you know, we as local government, we as community can do great things. And I think I would miss an opportunity to acknowledge the amazing work that Supervisor McPherson's office and the supervisor and Ginny Johnson did in creating 3CE, right? That is the largest by geographic area community choice aggregation company in the state.
Yep.
It has a surplus of close to $600 million right now in terms of revenue that they are putting out to developing the utility scale renewable power to be 100% renewable by 2030. Once we've built that infrastructure to provide the renewable power to everybody by 2030, you can guarantee that the successor to Supervisor McPherson and all of us will be wanting that money to be spent locally, to provide the rebates for batteries and panels, to building the microgrids that we need. But that big thing started here. It started with this person right here and Ginny Johnson, and it lives and it breathes now, and so we can do these things, right? We are a small but mighty county, and I want to leave you with that sentiment, and you know, working together with the Valley Women's Club on some of these big issues: sewer, power, telecom. You know, we can do this. We just, you know, we need to work together.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, one and all, for your interest and your concern, and hang in there. And may the storms be easy on you.
Do not be